I didn't want it to end like this. I really wanted to see you again. Just once. I loved you. I always loved you.
Within the events of Dead Space Extraction and the Dead Space comics, Nicole had tried to find a cure for the necromorph virus, and she would get close, only needing a medpack to complete the solution that would combat the necrotized flesh and bacteria, which was theorized as a way to provide immunity to the infection, or at least destroy it within a patient. Searching for the item in the medical bay, she would find that the doctors had used all the remaining medical items on the wounded. This, along with the constant harassment of necromorphs in her dreams, had gotten to her. She thought that the reality of the situation was too much for her to handle. It was either die on her own terms, or let her body become like one of them, or used in some other way, or to be brutally ripped apart by the invading necrotized abominations. The grim reality she had unwittingly walked into was that there was no hope, no way out, or off the ship to salvation. She would either fight and die, or die in her own way out. Seeing no way forward, she would open a one-way transmission to Isaac, leaving a video recording for him to find later on, in which she would leave her dying message and plan to use an empty syringe to inject air into her arm, causing an air embolism, giving her way out in the most merciful way she could think of, which Isaac would watch and come face to face with the realization that Nicole was in fact dead all along within the events of Dead Space Chapter 12. In this video, we will be exploring the idea of what would happen to Nicole if she either had been prevented from this fate or decided not to go through with it. Seeing no way out, she opens the transmission addressed to Isaac, thinking of if she had only just gone with Lexine and the others, she might have been able to find a way off the ship and back to her beloved. As she makes her speech to her lover and reveals the syringe, she starts talking about how she didn't want this to be her end and that she wanted to see him one last time. Within the moment, and about to do the unthinkable, she fails to notice the door to the room slide open with a shadowy figure walking in and approaching towards her. The figure becomes more visible the closer it walks towards her and into the dim light. As Nicole confesses her love for Isaac and is about to inject herself, the figure grabs and attacks her, knocking her out. As the figure becomes illuminated by the holographic screen, it is revealed to be none other than Dr. Mercer, who closes the transmission and would say to emotionless Nicole, "Inviting more to join the children? Good girl, but for now, sleep, as I have plans for you, and your transformation will be a glorious rebirth." He would finish by slowly stroking her hair. Nicole would awaken with her being strapped down to a table in a dimly lit room. She would begin trying to free herself, tugging at the arm and foot restraints, to find that they would not budge. She was indeed secured against her will, like a fly in a spider's web. She would call out for help, only to hear nothing but the eerie quietness of the vent fans and air traveling through the vents to answer her cries. A few more moments would pass as the door to the room would open with Dr. Mercer walking through and returning to her with a vial in his hand. He would talk to Nicole about the necromorphs, about their divinity, preaching to her that they are the children of the future and that their species are truly within the end of days, and these necromorphs are what will bring them out of the darkness and into the light of rebirth and divinity. As he would talk, he would poke and prod Nicole with his instruments as she sat there squirming in her restraints. As he preached, she would avoid eye contact, turning her head against the wall, only for him to grab her and force the eye-to-eye communication. She would interrupt him, asking if he was going to kill her, only for him to reply that he wasn't going to kill her. He would pause. She would let out a sigh of relief, only for him to tell her of the horrors that would be in store for her. After this, Mercer would sedate her, telling her to sleep and to dream of her impending future. Mercer would take the vial and look for a sample of necrotized tissue to be used in his experiments with his new test subject. At this time, Isaac would see the video and volunteer to be a part of the emergency response team on board the USG Kellyan, and shortly after, begin their journey through shock space. Nicole would later awaken to Mercer softly beckoning her to return to her nightmare, so that they could begin the slow, torturous, and horrific experiment. As she looked around the room, she could see surgical tools, along with a surgical drill. She would be very fearful of what this experiment would entail and what the end result would be for her. He would start recording an audio log. She would begin pleading for her survival as Mercer prepared for what he was about to do to her. He would begin marking the entry point for the drill and would use one final restraint to lock her head in place, effectively setting the reality of the situation in stone. As Mercer would talk, the cries and screams of Nicole would be picked up by the recording. As the drill got closer and closer, her cries and screams would intensify. As the drill began shredding her soft, pale skin, her cries and screams would join together, becoming a mangled noise twisting with the grinding of the drill, ripping through the thin layer of muscle and skin, and then grinding down on her skull. As the drill had finished its job, creating the entry point for the next step, Mercer would reach for the sample of tissue he had obtained earlier and began inserting it into her mind. Unfortunately, Nicole would still be alive for this next part, depending on if the drill did not damage her brain. As the bacteria from the sample began its work, rewriting her DNA from the inside out, Nicole would slowly become disconnected with reality, falling into a deep, dark sleep. The events of Dead Space would continue as normal. However, at Chapter 12, Kendra would reveal what the fate of Nicole to be, that the hunter that Isaac destroyed in Chapter 10 was in fact who Isaac had been searching for all this time. This would be soul-shattering for Isaac. Not only did he fail to save her from the horror of Dr. Mercer, but he would remember the images within his mind of disintegrating the woman that he loved, that would soon become the base for his growing dementia. Now, I'm not too fond of that story as it doesn't really serve us all too well the actual story. It would make for an interesting twist within the game that you unwittingly killed Nicole without knowing that you actually did, but not an overall great ending. But have no fear, I have a better scenario for all of you, one that intertwines with other survivors within the ship and may just lead Nicole back to Isaac for real this time. As Nicole was about to stab herself with the needle, she would have an epiphany, thinking about her relationship with Isaac, past advice given to her. As she slowly dropped the syringe, she began to think to herself that she can't do this. She needs to fight on, to save Isaac from the grief her death would bestow upon him. She decides to tell Isaac of the horrors infesting the Ishimura, and asks him for when he sees the message to call for help. Isaac, as soon as he would see this, would attempt such a feat. He would be accused of being insane and mentally ill. However, he would soon volunteer himself to be a part of the emergency response team to find the Ishimura. Back on the Ishimura, Nicole would equip her plasma cutter and head down to the flight lounge, in hopes that if Isaac were to come, she could assist him in landing in the flight deck. As she would get to the tram station, she would notice that the vehicle has malfunctioned and would need to be repaired in the flight deck. She would climb down the ladder and into the littered, dark, misty trench and travel to the flight deck. As she travelled, coming close to the deck she was headed, Nicole would hear faint screams and other ungodly noises. She would then overhear a group of survivors screaming, fighting the twisted crew members. Once she had arrived, she would see scattered body parts all over the deck, but not of the survivors, or at least she hoped not. These would belong to the necromorph party. As she'd walked past them, she would overhear 3 men talking about what to do next. They would soon get interrupted by Nicole with her sliding the door open. The 3 armed men held their tools out towards her, but once they saw a woman standing in front of them rather than a monster of recombination, they lowered them. She would ask for their help, when they would be interrupted by more necromorphs. This would separate them. Benson would defend Nicole to the best of his ability. However, doing this gave the necromorphs an opening, killing the other 2 survivors in a flash. Outnumbered and with limited ammo, the two went back to the trench, temporarily locking the door so the necromorphs could not follow. With their path blocked by the necromorphs, they decided to find other survivors to put up a good fight against them, where Benson would say that if they headed to the mining bay, they might be able to find people there, as he heard survivors were gathering, and Nicole would want to stay, but with no way of getting past a mob of mutated crew members, she would follow Benson to the mining deck. As they would move to the desired location, distant noises could be heard over the hissing and clanging of the ship's interior works. A loud, rumbling noise could be heard echoing through the trench, like something had just crashed or exploded. This would put the two on edge before continuing through the darkness. They would soon come to the main area of the mining deck at the tram station, where they would meet a miner and a woman known as Elizabeth. After talking about their experiences, the miner would confirm he encountered Dr. Kine as he was taken hostage by him, with the good doctor rambling about the access codes to the marker, and that it would be the only way to end it. Nicole would think on this and decide to look for Dr. Kine, as if he had an idea on how to stop these things, then it could be worth her while. Benson would protest about this, but Nicole would become set in her path to put an end to the outbreak. Nicole theorized that the crew deck would be a good place to start looking for him. As she was nearing the deck though, she would be thrown off her feet as another huge quake rocked the ship. She would get up later on with a loud ringing in her ears. Remembering what the miner had said, she would pick herself back up and find Kine in the mess hall of the crew deck, where the two would exchange theories on how to stop the outbreak. Kine would be impressed with her creativity with her antivirus theory, but like her, he would be dead set on the marker being sent back to the planet to seal the hive mind. But unfortunately, he would not be able to complete that task due to the shuttle's navigational systems being sabotaged by himself. He would state that he had a solution though, that an engineer would be on his way to come and fix the shuttle so that they could fly down to the colony. Nicole would ask on who the individual was. As Kine was about to tell her of the identity of the engineer, he would be interrupted by the arrival of Isaac Clarke. When Isaac would eventually meet Dr. Kine, Nicole would reveal herself to him. They would both be excited and overjoyed to see each other again, and to see the other was alright and in one piece. Now here's where the story and the scenario come together into one. Let's speed things up here in the interest of time. Isaac would defeat the hunter. Nicole would meet Isaac on the flight deck, but wouldn't overall trust Kendra, so would go up to the control room where she would battle a guardian just in case something went down between them. Kine would still die, and Nicole instead of Isaac would recall the shuttle. Kendra would escape via an escape pod. The two would fly down to the colony, fight their way to the pedestrian side by side, and place it back. However, Nicole would stare at the marker as it would activate, expanding the dormancy field, causing all necromorphs to cease and desist, becoming lifeless once again. This is where Isaac would step into the decontamination cylinder. As Nicole would begin to see the symbols, the cylinder would close, trapping Isaac as the decontamination begins. Nicole would turn around to see Kendra holding a pistol aimed directly at her. She would order Nicole to rip the marker off the pedestrian. Nicole would refuse, however. Kendra would not have any of that, and would hit her across the face with her gun. She would fall towards Isaac, and as the marker was lifted off the platform and onto the loader to be transported back to the shuttle, Isaac would finally be able to see Nicole. As she would begin getting up, she would feel something warm run down the side of her face to find it's her blood. Kendra would monologue. Nicole would attempt to stop her while she was engaged on Isaac. Isaac would be helpless to do anything to aid Nicole in her struggle, and that's when a gunshot would break out, stopping the fight in its tracks. Nicole would slowly fall to the ground, and Kendra would run back to the shuttle the way they previously came from. Nicole would crawl to the glass and talk to Isaac, knowing that she was fatally wounded and that she would not be able to help him any further. She told Isaac to stop Kendra, otherwise it would be the end to humanity itself. She would reminisce about the good times with him. Isaac would cry for Nicole's fate, stating that if he never pushed her to join the medical team on the ishimura, Ishimura, then none of this would ever have happened, and they would never have been subjected to this. But Nicole would have none of that and tell him that she never let him push her to do anything. If she didn't want to or care for what she did, then she would not be doing it. As her time grows short, in her last breath she confessed to him that she loved him, that she always loved him, before dying of blood loss. Isaac would cry out and slowly pick himself back up out of anger and vowed to get his revenge on Kendra. Now that's a better ending for Nicole's what-if scenario. Sure enough, it's more tragic than the overly gruesome transformation into a hunter, but I kinda like this one because it shows off Nicole's integrity within the story and her ingenuity, like she can actually do stuff by herself. And that's genuinely what I think would happen if she did not off herself. But in my opinion, Nicole's death in the lore is a fixed point in time, so if she would not do it, then somebody else would do it for her. But what do you think? Comment below. What's your opinion of what would happen with the character? Would she survive or would she die as intended? If you enjoy these type of videos, then hit the video up with a like rating and comment another what if scenario down below, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you're new here, then why not sign up to join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing the notification bell for updates on future content and posts. And if you're feeling even more like a champion, then check out the new memberships for the channel for exclusive benefits, and I'll see all of you on the front lines, and have a good one.